Hi, and welcome to this Countercraft webinar. Alert! Breach detected! What would you do with 48 hours? Basically, we're going to be talking about how deception technology can buy you time to respond to threats focused in the financial sector. So let's have a look. First of all, a quick introduction. My name is Richard Barrell. I'm the Technical Evaluations Manager here at Countercraft, and I come from a blue team background. My background is working in, actually finance and financial security, and I have been working at Countercraft now for the last 6 years in my capacity as a sort of a subject matter expert in deception, and also the project lead for military and government deployments, as well as working with our customers in the financial sector. So let's have a look at the sort of the snapshot. Now, I think it's fairly safe to say that the financial sector, or companies within the financial sector, are a fairly mature market. Most organizations, it's very rare to come across a financial organization that doesn't have a strong security posture. They already have antivirus, EDR, XDR, etc., and a strong financial team. And many of the organizations have their own threat intel organization that are able to sort of process, handle, and respond to threats. But one of the big questions is, have I been compromised already? Is there a way to detect if there is an existing breach within the organization? And many of the things that, because we have, or financial organizations tend to have a SOC with an existing security posture, there are a lot of alerts, and alert fatigue is a huge problem, because if you're in the SOC and you're bombarded, if you're a SOC operator and you're bombarded with 1,001 alerts every day, eventually you become alert blind. And you miss things. It's difficult to see, and it's difficult to know which to respond. And if you start to go through every one, you find that false positives is also a huge issue, but it's impossible to identify which is a false positive and which is a positive until you've actually gone in and spent the time to analyze it. And now we're facing a situation as well where, especially areas like malware, malware is coming built in with tools to bypass things like EDM. We're seeing EDM bypass quite a lot. And this means that there are tools out there that allow us to bypass traditional security measures, which is a big old problem, as well as the environment in which we're functioning. So we're looking at insider threat, lateral movement, in the financial. I mean, imagine if your fund managers can talk to the trading floor. Outside of cyber, that's called insider trading. Detecting if people are trying to move around within the network. Often within financial organizations, there's a large requirement or a large use of temp staff. Something I've seen myself. You've got a large pool of temporary staff. You're not entirely sure where they came from or their provenance. Obviously, they're given trusted positions. Their role is, their credentials are limited, but they still have the ability to move around within a network. So, trying to identify that, and then also user targeted attacks, C-suite spear phishing. It's a big issue, and prioritizing risk mitigation. Identifying gaps, reducing alert fatigue. These are all mechanisms that deception can provide a solution to. And when we're talking about improving response, we're also looking at how to reduce the time to detection. That's a really key thing, especially if you consider IBM's recent report that said, well, there are various reports that quote different numbers, but it seems to me that the average is around the 270 days before detection, which is quite a terrifying statistic. So anything that will speed up the time to detection, anything that will therefore speed up time to response, is a huge advantage. And deception is a great way of doing this. And deception is part of a sort of a coherent active defense response. An active defense is basically defined as increasing the cost for the attacker while at the same time decreasing the cost for the defender. So you're making it harder for the attacker to execute their attacks, but you're increasing the power and decreasing the resource required for the blue team in order to provide an effective solution. Essentially, you're buying time to respond. And this is what we're going to be talking about So we've looked at some of the issues facing us. Now let's have a look at how we can use deception to buy us time to respond. What's deception all about? Deception really falls into a series of categories or a series of things that it can provide us. The first is detection. Okay, it's the detection of adversary activity, the detection of a threat actor moving inside our network, a threat actor moving outside our network doing external reconnaissance, detection to provide us an alert that something has happened. Think like a tripwire, and with you're stretching a string between two trees in the forest, someone walks down the path, trips over the tripwire and rings a bell, and you get an alert that someone's walking in the forest. Detection in the deception model is very similar. We're providing that sort of early warning that something is happening in our environment. The next step is deflection, and deflection is really all about the moving up the scale of sophistication of deception deployment. And from deflection, what we're doing is we're taking that detection, we're detecting that an adversary is operating, and we're deflecting them into a deception environment. You can think almost like moving them away into a sort of a quarantine zone. Now, looking at the deflection piece, what we're trying to do here is we're playing on the mindset or the way that the adversaries are thinking. So we're saying, imagine that you're in the adversary. You've got an attack that you're trying to carry out. You've got an objective. You've got a goal to reach. Okay, so you're looking all the time. You're trying to find ways to achieve your goal. We achieve deflection or moving the adversary into this quarantine zone simply by providing a path of least resistance for them to achieve that goal. So we provide low-hanging fruit that they can take and then move into what they think is the next step of their attack path, and then carry on with that so that they're in this deception environment. While they're in the deception environment, we move to the next step, which is analysis. And what we're doing is we're monitoring everything that they're doing in the deception environment. We're monitoring their actions. We're monitoring the commands they use. They're monitoring the exploits that they leverage, the tools that they download. And in real time, sending this data back to a central server where we can analyze the data. And we can analyze it and use that event data to respond. Now, the analysis may be something like, what are they doing? Oh, it's not something that we're really interested in, or it's no threat to us. We can leave it. Or it may be that, oh Lord, we need to respond, and we need to respond now. How do we do that? Because we're getting the analysis of the threat intel that we're creating, this adversary generated threat intel, to formulate our response. Okay, so we're buying time because the adversary is in the quarantine. They're not touching our production environment. We've got time to see what they're doing, and we can use that time to respond appropriately. So that's really the essence of the 48 hours. When it comes to deception, what we're looking to do is increase the cost and complexity for attackers while reducing the cost and complexity for defenders. This is the essence of active defense, essentially, but this is using deception, again, in a mode of detection, deflection and quarantine, and then generating intelligence, creating intelligence for an intelligent response. If you want to think of it in a simple way, we're catching the bad guys and then capturing intel. So we're trapping the attacker in a safe place, watching what they're doing. And the thing about deception is, of course, we're building like a digital twin. We're not doing a real digital twin, but we're building a situation that looks like what they're expecting to see. And when they're looking at what they're expecting to see, their defenses are going to come down there thinking, great, I've achieved my goal. I'm able to carry out my attack. I can exfiltrate the data, or I can unleash my payload in this environment. I'm feeling good about this. I will carry on my attack. And of course, obviously, we're watching that and we're seeing exactly what they're doing. So this intel that we're capturing is the playbook of what they're doing. It's like playing poker against someone, but you can see their cards because you know exactly what they're doing. So you know exactly what you have to do to stop them achieving their goal. In terms of analysis, and especially with the Countercraft platform, you don't need a PhD to analyze our threat intel. Okay, a lot of the tools that we're providing are based around the enrichment of data, the visualization of data, and the ability to report effectively. Because there are some key things about threat intel that we all know. It's only as good as the people that have it. So the ability to provide a meaningful report up the chain of command, or to your colleagues or to the incident response team, is really valuable. And to build a good report, you need to be able to access useful data. And so the telemetry that the Countercraft will capture from a deception environment is turned into event data, and that event data is enriched from a series of onboard databases and onboard data feeds that allow us to provide extra information. You can think of this like an IP address. If you think of an IP address, it's just 4 octets. It's four groups of numbers, and yes, it's useful. But if you say that's an IP address, that's an IP address that's coming from North Korea or Scotland or South America, you've instantly added context. And then if you can say to that, well, this IP address is known to be linked to specific malicious behavior, suddenly you've got a valuable piece of threat intel, and you're adding context, adding enrichment to it. It's the same IP address, but you're adding it and making more valuable by enriching. And then visualization really is the ability to sort of cut up the data that we're receiving and filter it and look for important keys, generating timelines, generating maps, generating maps against industry standard frameworks to standardize the way that information is being presented. All of these tools are done in many cases automatically, and so you really don't need a PhD to analyze the data, because a lot of the analysis is done for you. And this moves on to response. So an intelligent response and an appropriate response based on real-time, relevant adversary-generated threat intel. This is the goal of the deception deployment. This is the goal of having this whole deception deployment. And there are two sorts of response that you can have using a deception environment. You can have manual responses, responses that you do yourself, again using a platform like Countercraft that allows you to interact with the deception environment. The way that we set out our deception allows you to interact directly with the adversary as they are performing their tasks on the deception hosts or in the deception environment. And you can do this entirely manually, or you can set up trigger actions that allow you to program automated responses for common activities. We do this using rules. So you can have a rule to say, I want to match a particular adversary behavior pattern. And when I detect that behavior pattern, I want to perform a specific action, or I want to share the data automatically with my SIEM, or promote an action through my SOAR platform. So let's say I detect, again, using an IP address, because it's the simplest example we can have, take an IP address and feed it directly through the SOAR platform into the firewall and say, okay, look, we've got this IP address. It's a fresh IOC. It's a fresh indicator of compromise. This is the IP address that we know that this threat actor is using right now. We can block it so they can be of no further damage or no further risk to the rest of my network. So these are the ways that we can perform response. And all this is around, ties in sort of the whole concept of intelligence and response, deflection and detection, really sort of ties into risk management. And what we're looking at is using deception as a tool for risk management. Identifying real risks. Now, this is the core of deception. This is the core of adversary generated threat intel. What we're doing is we're discovering the playbook of the threat actor. We're working out what is it that they're doing and how are they doing it. It's okay to receive a list of CVEs or a vulnerability report for all the systems related to the Microsoft tools that you have in your operational environment. But being able to see exactly which vulnerabilities are being leveraged, which exploits are being used, how they're being used, and how the interaction of different platforms is being mapped out or is being used by a threat actor to achieve their goal. This is identifying the real risk. And once you've identified the real risk, you can then identify the right controls. And in many cases, this can be done, especially within the Countercraft platform, we can do this automatically. But once you've identified the right controls, you can then prioritize mitigation. You can say, well, look, this is an example that a colleague of mine gave me, saying, look, I receive 200 CVEs every week, and I've got to be able to patch them. The requirement is that I need to patch all these vulnerabilities, but I don't know where to start. They're on the list. They all look the same to me. How do I prioritize this? Well, by being able to identify the real risk, by being able to identify the right controls, you can prioritize how you do that. And it may be that the controls you need, in some cases, are already in place, but we're providing a gap and saying a gap analysis and saying, okay, look, this is the gap. It may be at the list of 200 vulnerabilities, the first 10 were golden, but it's actually number 199 that I really is the one that's causing me the biggest risk, or presents the biggest risk to my organization. I need to patch that one first, whereas previously it would have been to the end, and if you got to that one, well, maybe you'd have been lucky. But this way, using this intel, using the information that we're gathering, identifying the risks, identifying the right controls, you're starting to take back the advantage from the attackers. You're starting to be able to react to them rather than a sort of a reactive way. You're taking a proactive and defensive position by prioritizing your mitigation, and therefore reducing the time to mitigation. If you know that of this list of 200, you only have to sort out 3, that's a massive benefit, because it means you can prioritize your work, you can focus your work, and you can get the important stuff done first, rather than maybe missing something out. Fire door. This is my favorite example of where deception can work, and this really ties into all of the different points. This is the detection, this is deflection, and this is response. This is going back to the title of the webinar. This is buying you time to respond. We mentioned 48 hours because 48 hours after years of doing this is about the average time of quarantine, of dwell time, if you like, that we're keeping threat actors engaged in our environments. Sometimes it's longer, sometimes it's days or even weeks. And in some cases, slightly less, but we're still buying the time. What do you do with those 48 hours? Well, those 48 hours are what you do to buy you time to respond. So let's say, for example, you're being attacked. You've deflected the adversary into the deception environment. Therefore, they're not performing their attack on the real environment. Okay, let's say they were after, this is an attacker that's trying to access your customer database, exfiltrate your customer account data. They haven't been able to exfiltrate the data because they're in a fake environment. So any data they do is completely fake. Because they haven't exfiltrated any data, there is no customer breach, there is no customer data breach. You don't really have to report this. So there's minimized reputational damage. And therefore, this is the sort of the collateral benefit of the detection and the deflection. You're keeping the adversary occupied while you then respond. This is what you're doing with your 48 hours. Another colleague of mine was telling me a story of a customer that we have who was saying, we're working in an environment where we would need to shut down gracefully if we detected an attack, and buying us that time to shut down gracefully enables us to respond better. And the graceful shutdown means that we don't lose weeks and money, many millions of dollars, in restarting our production line, because we've been able to shut it down gracefully. That's the fire door. That's the ability to keep the adversary locked up while you respond. So why countercraft? Well, there are 3 areas where we excel, apart from the obvious deception deployment: the speed of the deployment, the ability to automate, and the fact that we offer you with an enterprise-ready solution that can literally fit in 30 days or less. And 30 days or less for deception deployment, that's a big boast. But majority of our customers find that that's the time it takes. We don't have to go around the network installing agents on every single endpoint. We have a software-based solution which allows for great flexibility, and it allows for simplified design and deployment of deception, as well as simplified design and deployment. We're using tools like an intuitive drag and drop interface for deception design. We're using templates of use cases that we can deploy again and again and again at the touch of a button. And then in a cloud environment, again, with the flexibility of operating both on-prem or in the cloud, we have auto deployment. Our platform can drive the Amazon, the AWS EC2 framework, their API. We can drive the Azure API. We work with DigitalOcean. We work with common virtual environment tools, so we can drive their APIs. So in fact, we can actually auto deploy deception from the same console, reducing the management overhead, reducing the time it takes, and reducing the hassle that it is of having to go and set up new machines. We can do it for you at the touch of a button. We also automate a lot of the realism, the ways of keeping this deception fresh using our tool Active Behavior, which mimics genuine hands-on keyboard. We're setting up personas of simulated users with the environment to keep the environment fresh, to generate network traffic, to generate log activity, to generate patterns of behavior, which make the environment look really real, make them credible. So if an attacker enters, this looks like a real network. This isn't a cold, dead honeypot. This is a vibrant, active deception environment. We're also automating rules, and we brushed on this earlier, but the ability to automate responses using matched triggers, or to integrate directly with third-party tools. In enrichment, the terms of being able to bring in data and enrich the event data. We're enriching the information that we're capturing within the deception environment. For example, the MITRE ATT&CK framework, the MITRE ENGAGE framework, security controls that are automatically linked. So mitigation, automatic mitigation strategies using the NIST 853 framework, and generating automated timelines of attack, for example, in terms of reporting. This is key. If you have to report an attack or an incident, the first thing anyone asks for is a timeline. We generate it automatically, where the attacker was, what they did, when they did it, and how they moved across the network. And we provide an enterprise-ready solution. So as I mentioned, we have a full suite of integrations with platforms that are based around deployment, such as Amazon or Azure, around enrichment of data, such as Maxmind geolocation or IP abuse database. Integrations that are all about sharing threat data. So integrations with the most industry standard SIEM, or the most popular market SIEM platforms in the market, such as Splunk, IBM QRadar, Elastic, you name it, it's in the bundle. Also SOAR platforms such as Palo Alto Cortex, MISP, the ability to send messages to your MISP environment, so that you can have ready threat sharing within your community. Integrations with messaging tools, so you can send messages to Slack or to Teams or open a ticket in Jira. You have this full ability to communicate the threat data, so operators within your SOC or your incident response team can be alerted just to the important things, but make sure that they're alerted on time, and so that they have a timely response. The flexibility of deployment, as I mentioned before, flexibility in terms of the systems that we can generate. Because of the way that Countercraft works, and because of our model, we don't use emulations, we use real operating systems. We can adapt to legacy tools. Windows XP, for anyone? We can run deception environments using your own homebrew or your own in-house developed software platforms, because we merely have to instrument a copy of it. So there is a huge flexibility of deployment, both on-prem, even in the cloud. The Countercraft solution is native to the cloud. We can operate entirely in the cloud, or we can operate hybrid environments based on-prem, in the cloud, or a mix of both. We provide comprehensive training. We have a 3-tier training course now, which is providing certificated training that take you from 0 to hero. From the level of associate, so understanding deception technology in general in the Countercraft platform, through the professional to the elite, which is full-on troubleshooting, and the ability to do advanced deception design and advanced incident response using deception. A simple licensing model. There's no need to do complex calculations to work out what we need and how we do it. We have a very simple licensing module that makes deployment super easy, and obviously full technical support, not only to support you while you're in operations, but also to support you as you begin your deception journey. And as you begin your deception journey, you're going to come across a requirement for use cases. So let's have a look at some of the use cases. So having discussed how we can do this, let's look at some use cases that refer back to what we were talking at the beginning of the webinar about unauthorized users or lateral movement, and how that can be detected and mitigated using deception technology. The first case we're going to look at is a payments platform. Okay, I'm not going to name names, but it's written on screen. So what we're setting up here is a crown jewel, right? This is something that you want to know if someone's trying to gain access to. And this is a campaign that we're using in many of our financial customers, providing access to a payments platform front end, and monitoring if people are trying to access this, and indeed seeding breadcrumbs that would allow someone who is trying to move around, putting the breadcrumbs in places. If someone's trying to move around and investigate, we can find out where they are, where they've come from, which endpoint they've gained access from, and we can start to, identify the user, identify the threat actor, let's say, and identify that insider threat. And this is really powerful. And the experience we've had with it has been really positive. It's a really simple campaign to deploy. It deploys really quickly. It requires very little setup, but the intel that it's responding in over a sort of like a 4-week period that this was running in a financial organization, they caught 2 people trying to access 2 unauthorized users trying to access this Swift platform, which is something that was very useful for them to find out. So the idea is that we set up this fake deception portal. This is entirely using the deception platform. This is literally a click deploy within the deception platform. It's all provided for you by Countercraft and set up, and then the distributing the breadcrumbs through the endpoints that are designed using templates that we can provide, allows the attacker to come in, find these particular tokens. Now they could be usernames and passwords. If you have Swift tokens, you can use this, and this becomes then like a hardware aspect, which is something unique to Countercraft, the ability to include hard and physical breadcrumbs into the deception environment, and then have them try and access this platform. And what we're going to do is capture the attempts to access, capture the credentials that are being used. Because we know where they came from, we can identify where they are. So we can look at, is this sort of like someone just trying Mickey Mouse? Is this someone who's trying to test a valid formatted credential like username at organization.com or whatever? Or is this someone trying a real credential, trying an LDAP credential, for example? All of this information allows us to gauge the severity of the infraction, let's say, and generates a lot of intel that we can then use to respond intelligently. By the same token, we're providing detection. We're also providing an alert and quarantining this threat actor, because we're seeing them interact with a fake environment. We're getting the alert, we're seeing what they're doing. They think they're trying to access a real environment. Well, we can nip downstairs, tap them on the shoulder and say, excuse me. Obviously, the campaign objectives are to detect threat actor and identify the data important to your adversaries and how it's targeted to them. And you can... The next one up is lateral movement. And again, lateral movement is in a similar vein. You could say that the payments platform campaign is a sort of a very, very specific lateral movement campaign, but this is a more generic lateral movement campaign. And this is to identify endpoint compromise, someone perhaps who's gained a foothold in an endpoint and is then trying to do investigation. They're doing reconnaissance on the endpoint, and then they're looking to make a jump laterally into other systems. So someone, let's say, who's doing recon on the network, and they're looking to see, maybe move to a file share to see whether they want to deploy their ransomware, or it's someone who's within your network trying to move between departments or access material they shouldn't be accessing. So what we do is we use the power of Countercraft's platform to distribute breadcrumbs across endpoints using templates that allow the easy deployment of things like in-memory credentials, Active Directory resources, links to genuine user accounts in Active Directory, RDB config files, and so on, or indeed things like documents that call home if they're touched. A whole range of both cyber and physical breadcrumbs that are available to us, and then that provides an access point where access to these deception environments, the adversary takes this path of least resistance, makes the leap into the deception environment, where they're in an environment where they can carry out their attacks and continue the reconnaissance within the safety of this deception, this fake environment. All the while we are buying time. While they are occupied in that deception environment, we are buying time to take the intel that they're generating and respond intelligently. So this is really another example of detecting threat actor movement, observing the vectors and paths, and identifying the data that may be important to them. So one last to say is thank you very much for sticking to the end. I hope that this has been of use and shown different ways in which the Countercraft cyber deception platform, or our deception technology, can be used to buy time for the blue team, for the defender, to react intelligently based on the threat intel that they're collecting, and stay one step ahead of the attacker. Now, if you want to find out more, please feel free to contact Countercraft and we can arrange an opportunity to talk in greater detail. But a good place to start is at our website, which is www.countercraftsec.com. Thank you very much.